Have you ever met someone who seemed unshakable? The kind of person who walks into chaos and somehow becomes the calm. Not because they shout louder, not because they're the strongest in the room, but because nothing outside of them ever seems to move what's inside. And you wonder, were they born like that? Is it luck? Genetics? A perfect childhood I never had? But what if I told you that kind of strength isn't something you're given? It's something you build, quietly, relentlessly, from the inside out. And today, I want to show you how one man, over 400 years ago, built it so completely. He never lost a single duel, not one, even when the odds were impossible. And more importantly, how an ordinary man today, broken and burned out, rebuilt that same strength. Not by adding more, but by removing everything that didn't belong. This is not a story of motivation. It's a story of transformation. And by the end of it, you may realize you've been far stronger than you think. You've just never been trained to see it. Let's begin. We grow up thinking strength looks a certain way. Big muscles, loud voices, people who dominate the room, make fast decisions, never hesitate. But have you ever noticed? That kind of strength breaks the moment life punches back. It's not the loudest people who survive the storm. It's the quiet ones, the still ones, the ones who carry something deeper than appearances. There's a story, almost a legend, of a man named Miyamoto Musashi. He lived in Japan during the 1600s, a time of warlords, sword duels, and no second chances. Musashi fought over 60 life-or-death duels. He started at age 13. He never lost. But here's what most people get wrong. Musashi wasn't the strongest. He wasn't even the fastest. In fact, some say he looked clumsy compared to other warriors. So why did he never lose? Because his strength came from somewhere else. Not from biceps, not from swords, but from something that couldn't be shaken, his mind. He trained himself to be unmoved, not fearless but unaffected by fear, not tireless but unstoppable even when tired. He called it the strategy of emptiness, and before he died, he wrote down everything in a small book called The Book of Five Rings. Not a book of poetry, not philosophy, but a brutal, honest manual on how to live, fight, and become unbreakable. Centuries later, that same book would land in the hands of a man on the edge of falling apart. A man not unlike you or me. A man who had lost his strength, not in his body, but in his spirit. His name was Daniel, and this is where his story begins. Daniel was 54. He'd spent most of his adult life doing everything right. College degree, steady job, marriage, 2 kids, a house with a lawn. From the outside, things looked fine, respectable even. But inside, he was tired. Not just the kind of tired you fix with a nap. The kind that sinks into your bones. The kind that doesn't go away when you sleep. The kind that feels like you're slowly fading from your own life. He couldn't remember the last time he woke up excited. He couldn't remember the last time he felt proud of himself. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had stopped living and started maintaining. He told himself it was just part of getting older. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was weak. Not in the way men are afraid to admit. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. He'd wake up with good intentions. Today I'll go for a walk, eat clean, maybe journal. And by lunch it was fast food, YouTube, and a quiet shame he wouldn't speak about. His wife had started picking up the slack at home. His kids didn't come to him for advice anymore. He had become invisible in his own house. Until one afternoon something cracked. It was after a meeting. His boss had questioned his performance again. Nothing major, just a comment. But in the parking lot, alone in his car, Daniel broke. Tears came, uncontrollable. from nowhere, like grief he didn't know he'd been carrying. And for the first time he admitted it, not to anyone else, just to himself. I don't know who I am anymore. That night, while everyone was asleep, he searched online, how to rebuild your mind after 50, how to get strong again. Why do I feel so weak all the time? Most of the results were fluff, generic advice, motivational quotes that felt hollow, until he stumbled upon an obscure thread mentioning a name he hadn't heard since college, Miyamoto Musashi, and that small discovery, that dusty old book, would become the fire that lit his path back to strength, but not the kind of strength he once believed in, the kind no one sees until everything else falls away. At first, Daniel thought the Book of 5 Rings would be full of ancient sword techniques or poetic riddles, but it wasn't. It was blunt, unforgiving, strangely modern. One line hit him harder than anything else: do nothing which is of no use. That night, he sat in silence for a long time. And he realized almost everything in his day was of no use. The hours spent doom-scrolling, the snacks to soothe boredom, the complaining, the excuses, the need for perfect conditions just to do the smallest thing. He'd wait for motivation to strike, wait until the house was quiet, wait until his back didn't hurt, wait until he felt like it. And Musashi's answer to that: if you wait for perfect conditions, you are already defeated. Daniel saw himself in those words. He wasn't weak because he lacked knowledge or tools. He was weak because his discipline depended on comfort. So he decided to flip the equation. No gym, no schedule, no app. Just one rule: 20 push-ups, every day, no matter what. It didn't matter if he was tired, didn't matter if he had a headache, didn't matter if he'd slept badly or felt unmotivated. Body, floor. Push-ups. Week 1 felt easy. Week 2, the aches started. Week 3, he caught a cold. Week 4, his back flared up again. In the past, this is where it would have ended. But this time, he made a deal with himself. If he couldn't do 20, he'd do 10. If 10 was too much, he'd do 5. But the number would never be 0. And that's when something strange began to happen. It wasn't the push-ups that changed him. It was the fact that he kept doing them when everything inside him screamed, "Not today." Every repetition became a quiet rebellion, not against the world, but against the old version of himself. The one who waited, the one who needed comfort, the one who always quit when life got inconvenient. And slowly, that man began to disappear. Most people think transformation happens when you add something: a better routine, a new piece of equipment, a meal plan, a mindset coach. But Daniel was starting to see what Musashi had discovered centuries ago. Strength isn't built by adding. It's revealed by removing. So he looked around his life, not to see what was missing, but to see what was in the way. He realized he could only eat healthy if his wife cooked. He could only focus if the house was quiet. He could only move his body if he had the right time and enough energy. Every habit was built on crutches, and without them, everything collapsed. So he started kicking the crutches out. He learned to cook one simple, healthy meal for himself every morning. He turned his phone off for the first hour of each day. He stopped waiting for motivation and acted like it didn't exist. And every time he felt the urge to skip his training, he repeated one line from Musashi: practice must continue regardless of circumstances. No gym, do push-ups in the kitchen. On vacation, push-ups in the hotel room. Sick, fewer reps, but never 0. He no longer asked, "How can I make this easier?" He asked, "What excuse do I need to eliminate next?" That shift, small on the surface, was radical underneath. Because discipline wasn't just a habit anymore. It was identity. He no longer needed to remind himself to stay consistent. He had simply become someone who never missed. And it wasn't heroic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, invisible, private. But it was building something, a kind of strength that didn't depend on mood, motivation, or circumstance. And slowly, Daniel stopped relying on anything, except himself. By day 40, Daniel's body was responding. His shoulders were firmer, his posture straighter. Even his kids noticed. "Dad, you look taller," his son said one morning. But inside, it was still chaos. He'd feel fine one moment. Then a sudden wave of worry would crash in. Deadlines, bills, his aging parents, his wife's silence at dinner. It didn't matter how many push-ups he could do. His mind was still fragile. That's when he stumbled across a passage from Musashi that stopped him cold. At the moment of battle, your mind should be no different than when drinking tea. Wait, what? How could anyone stay calm in battle? But Musashi's point was piercing. True strength is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to react to it. Daniel realized he had spent years fighting his emotions, fighting stress, resisting discomfort, escaping anything that felt hard to feel. But Musashi offered another way: observe, do not react. So Daniel began practicing, not on a meditation cushion, but in real life. When traffic got backed up and drivers honked, he breathed and noticed the rising tension, but didn't clench the wheel. When his wife criticized something he forgot to do, he felt the sting but said nothing for a moment, just watched the reaction rise and fall. It was agonizing at first. His body wanted to snap back, to defend, to explain, but he didn't. Instead, he whispered to himself, "This is the training." One day his boss raised his voice at a team meeting. Public, embarrassing. Daniel felt his chest tighten, the old urge to freeze, sweat, apologize. But something else happened. He stayed steady. His voice didn't crack. His hands didn't shake. He responded clearly, calmly. After the meeting, his boss looked at him strangely. "You okay?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "I'm better than okay." That night he wrote in his journal, "Emotional strength is physical. When the body is trained not to flinch, the mind learns not to run." He had begun to understand. Strength isn't about controlling the world. It's about controlling how you show up inside it. And the next lesson waiting for him would come after the action was over. The push-ups were now automatic, the emotional storms quieter. Daniel was moving through life with more clarity, more control. But there was a problem, subtle, sneaky. He was still collapsing after every effort. After a workout, he'd flop onto the couch. After a hard conversation, he'd distract himself with TV. After finishing a project, he'd celebrate like the war was over. It felt normal, deserved even. But then he read something from Musashi that turned his perspective upside down. The battle does not end when the enemy falls. It ends when you are truly safe. That's when Daniel discovered a concept Musashi called Zanshin. It means remaining mind, a kind of permanent awareness. Not tension, not paranoia, but the discipline of staying awake even after the action ends. Musashi warned of warriors who won duels, only to be killed while celebrating, not because they were weak, but because they thought it was over too soon. Daniel saw himself in those stories. He'd reach a milestone, then unplug completely. He'd solve one family issue and ignore the next one bubbling. He'd win a small victory and lose his rhythm the next day. So he started practicing Zanshin in his everyday life. After finishing his push-ups, Instead of collapsing, he'd stand in silence for 30 seconds, breathing, observing, anchoring. After a difficult meeting, he'd sit quietly at his desk, not reacting, not rushing to move on, just noticing what was still present in his body, in his thoughts. It seemed like nothing, but it changed everything, because when you pause after the doing, you allow the learning to settle in. You let the victory become wisdom. You let the effort become identity. Soon, people began noticing. "You're more grounded lately," one coworker said. His daughter joked, "You don't zone out like you used to." And it was true. Daniel wasn't doing more. He was simply more present in what he already did. He had stopped letting go the moment things were done, because he realized strength doesn't switch off. It stays quiet, steady, watching, and just in time, because the real storm was coming. Day 105. Daniel walked into what he thought was a routine team meeting. His boss wasn't smiling. HR was there, and the air heavy, cold. "We're making cuts," the boss said. "Your position has been eliminated." Just like that. For a moment, the old Daniel stirred, the one who would have panicked, spiraled, frozen. He felt the wave coming, heart rate rising, hands tingling, breath shortening. But then, nothing. No panic, no collapse, just awareness. "This is the test." He breathed, sat upright, looked his boss in the eye and said calmly, "Understood. What's the timeline?" Even the boss was thrown off. "You've got 30 days. I'm really sorry." "Daniel." "Thank you," he said. And that was it. He walked out, back to his desk. No frantic calls, no venting, no victimhood. Meanwhile, his colleagues, also laid off, were spiraling. Some cried in the parking lot. Some froze, staring at screens. Some began calling everyone they knew in desperation. Daniel? He opened his notebook, wrote down a new training goal, then he updated his resume, quietly. By the end of the week, he had lined up 3 interviews, and within 23 days, he had 3 offers. He chose one with better hours, better pay, and more respect. His old co-workers. Most were still looking, still reeling months later. Later that month, Daniel read a line from a sports psychologist who trains Olympic athletes. The difference between those who perform under pressure and those who collapse isn't talent. It's exposure to discomfort, on purpose, over time. And Daniel smiled, because the truth was simple. He didn't stay calm in the storm because he was special. He stayed calm because he'd trained for this. 105 days of showing up, 105 days of breath, effort, and silence, 105 days of push-ups, observation, and presence. The storm didn't break him, because he had already weathered one inside himself. And the most powerful part, nobody saw it coming. 6 months in, Daniel looked in the mirror and saw someone he barely recognized, not because of his body, though he was leaner, stronger, more alive, not because of his job, though he had just been promoted again, but because for the first time in decades, he felt unafraid, not fearless in the Hollywood sense, but something quieter, deeper. He no longer feared losing progress. He no longer feared starting over. He no longer feared not being enough, because he had stopped measuring. No more counting training days, no more milestone celebrations, no more social media posts for validation. The practice continued, the breath, the stillness, the discipline. But now, it was just who he was. And that's when something strange began to happen. People pulled away, not because he was arrogant, not because he preached, but because his presence made them uncomfortable. He didn't complain anymore, so others stopped complaining around him. He didn't make excuses, So others grew quiet when they started to. Even his own family began to notice. "You're getting kind of intense," his brother said. But Daniel didn't defend, didn't explain. He just smiled, because what they were really seeing was a mirror. When you remove fear, hesitation, and the hunger for approval, you reflect to others what they haven't yet faced, and not everyone's ready for that. But Daniel had made peace with it, because somewhere deep in his practice he understood what Musashi meant when he wrote his final words. "I regret nothing. I fear nothing. I desire nothing." That wasn't the attitude of a man who gave up. That was the mark of someone who had finally stopped fighting himself. One evening, Daniel walked into the living room, sweaty from a long evening walk. His son looked up from his book and said, almost without thinking, "You're different now, Dad. You seem unshakable." Daniel smiled again, not because it was true, but because he didn't need it to be. He had become what most people spend a lifetime chasing, a man at peace with himself. And peace, he realized, was not the absence of struggle. It was the presence of practice, so constant that no storm could shake the roots anymore.